Thorn-Bearer, Chapter 1. The Rustle of Bones. The rain in the Venom-Root Forest was not rain at all. It was a viscous emerald mist, thick with the scent of decay and a sickly sweet undertone that clung to the back of the throat like a forgotten promise. It seeped through the gaps in my tattered indigo kimono, a cold, insistent dampness that mirrored the chill within my bones. I didn't bother to shield my face. Protection was a luxury I could no longer afford. Survival was all that mattered now. I'd been tracking the movement of the Root-Thralls for 3 days, a monotonous ballet of silent, shuffling bodies. Their limbs perpetually damp, their faces blank and vacant. They weren't living, not truly. They were vessels, puppets animated by the insidious tendrils of the Spore-King's influence. Each one, a slow, agonizing consumption. Their lungs, choked with the spores of the elder spore, their minds hollowed by the fungal network that laced the forest floor. My name is Saku, and I am the Thorn-Bearer. It's a title earned in blood, and whispered on the wind, a bleak epitaph for a life spent dismantling empires of rot. I didn't choose this fate. The vines chose me. They began as a tremor, a subtle shift within my nervous system, a feeling of something hungry taking root. Now, they are a part of me, interwoven with my flesh, a parasitic embrace that grants me a terrifying, albeit unsettling, strength. They are wither vines, and they feed on decay. The forest itself seemed to mourn me, the bioluminescent fungi, casting an unsettling glow upon the scene. These weren't the gentle, nourishing lights of a healthy ecosystem. They pulsed with a sickly, frantic energy, a reflection of the Shogun's control, a visual representation of the forest's slow, deliberate corruption. The air vibrated with the low hum of the mycelial network, a chorus of silent suffering. I moved with a deliberate grace, a rhythm honed over years of solitary practice. My boots, crafted from hardened rootwood, sank silently into the spongy earth. My senses were heightened, augmented by the vines. They tasted the air, analyzed the decaying matter, translating the whispers of rot into a silent language I understood implicitly. The Shogun's presence radiated outwards like a heat haze, a suffocating wave of fungal dominance. Ahead, I saw them, a cohort of fungal guards, patrolling the edge of the whisperwood, the most heavily infested section of the forest. Their armor wasn't forged of steel, but of cultivated shelf mushrooms, iridescent blue and green, interwoven with a strange metallic sheen. They moved with unsettling uniformity, their faces impassive, their hands gripping blowpipes tipped with paralytic spores. They were the vanguard of the Shogun's dominion, designed to quell dissent and ensure the continued spread of the Mycelial-Slavery. I didn't approach with stealth. Stealth was a pointless exercise in a place where the very ground seemed to conspire against you. Instead, I let them see me. It was a calculated risk, a small offering to the predator I was about to engage. They halted, their movements stiff and deliberate. The lead guard, a hulking figure draped in a particularly large specimen of the fungal armor, raised his blowpipe. The air filled with the metallic scent of the spores. "Ronin," he said, his voice a dry rasp, "you trespass upon the Shogun's domain. Surrender, and your suffering will be swift." I didn't respond with words. Words are fleeting, meaningless in the face of the inevitable. I simply drew Blight-Reaper. The blade wasn't forged of steel. It was carved from petrified wood, aged and darkened by countless seasons of decay. Its edge was impossibly sharp, capable of slicing through flesh and bone, as if they were parchment. More importantly, it didn't bleed. Instead, it injected a lethal dose of rot, a viscous black fluid that devoured organic matter, reducing it to a fine gray dust. The first guard lunged, his blowpipe aimed at my head. I didn't move to dodge. I inhaled. The rain of emerald mist filled my lungs, a welcome tide of poison. The wither vines within me surged, absorbing the toxins, converting them into fuel, feeding the unsettling hunger within me. Then, I moved. The swing of Blight-Reaper was a blur of motion, a whirlwind of death. The blade connected with the guard's fungal armor with a sickening crunch. The mushroom shattered, not with a crack or a splinter, but with a complete and utter disintegration. The guard didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. He simply dissolved, reduced to a cloud of gray dust that was quickly swept away by the rain. The other guards reacted instinctively, unleashing a volley of paralytic spores. But I was already moving, anticipating their attacks. I met the spores with my breath, allowing the wither vines to consume them, neutralizing their effects before they could take hold. With each strike, the forest seemed to weep, the fungi glowing brighter, their silent horror intensifying. The air grew heavier, thicker with the scent of decay. I wasn't fighting them, I was accelerating their demise. As the last guard fell, collapsing into a similar heap of gray dust, I turned my attention to the deeper corruption. This wasn't just a skirmish, it was a slow, methodical unraveling, a deliberate pruning of the Shogun's poisonous empire. This was the work of the Thorn-Bearer. Chapter 2. The Echo of Silence. The rain continued. A persistent melancholic drizzle that clung to the slick fungal surfaces of the Venom-Root Forest. The air, though marginally cleaner, still pressed against me with the weight of 1,000 slow deaths. Hachi, the Pollen-Bee, settled onto my shoulder, its brass body warm against the newly formed chill of my wither vines. The drone's amber eyes, usually a frantic focused point, were now softened, glazed with the aftermath of battle. It was a quiet assessment, a mechanical reverence for a task completed. I adjusted Blight-Reaper, running a calloused hand along the petrified wood. The blade felt heavier now, saturated with the residue of rot, a tangible echo of the forest's agony. My movements, once driven by a desperate, almost frantic need to inflict damage, had adopted a rhythm, a measured grace born of understanding. I was no longer just destroying, I was accelerating a process, directing the inevitable return to stillness. Ahead, the path leading to the Shogun's throne room was a river of gray dust, a testament to the carnage ID wrought. The fungal guards, once towering embodiments of oppressive authority, were reduced to nothing more than memories, dispersed by the humid air. It was a disconcerting sight, a battlefield sculpted entirely by dissolution. The neural networks are fragmented, Hachi buzzed, its voice a series of clicks and whirs. The Shogun's control is attenuated, but the remnants persist, focused around the elder spore. I didn't respond immediately. I scanned the surrounding vegetation, noting the subtle shifts in color patches of emerald fungi that pulsed with a weaker, more erratic light, trails of gray dust clinging to the leaves. This forest wasn't simply decaying, it was grieving. A deep, silent sorrow permeated everything. "Prepare yourself," I said, my voice a low rasp. "The core is not easily surrendered." The throne room was a cathedral of rot, an unsettling space dominated by the elder spore. It wasn't merely a fungus, it was a sentient mass, a vast, pulsating organ that housed the Shogun's consciousness. The walls were covered in intricate, interwoven mycelial networks, glowing with an internal, sickly luminescence. The air here was denser, heavier, thick with the scent of primordial decay, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. The Shogun's guards, remnants of the initial assault, still patrolled the perimeter, their fungal armor shimmering with an unnerving vitality. They weren't actively aggressive, they simply existed, extensions of the Shogun's will, waiting for any movement, any disruption. They were echoes of a dying empire. I approached them with deliberate slowness, moving like a shadow amongst shadows. My movements were intuitive, honed by years of solitude, and the unsettling communion with my wither vines. I used the terrain, utilizing the dense fungal growths as cover, allowing Hachi to scout ahead, its sensors mapping the guards' positions with chilling accuracy. The first encounter was swift, brutal, and strangely beautiful. One of the guards, a hulking warrior encased in a particularly robust shelf mushroom, lunged with a blowpipe, aiming for my chest. I didn't flinch. I inhaled. The rain of emerald spores filled my lungs, welcomed, absorbed by the ever-hungry vines. This time, however, I didn't initiate the decay. I let the spores find me, accelerating the process, amplifying the Shogun's panic. As the poison coursed through my system, the wither vines responded with a frantic surge. They grew, twisting and contorting, seeking to integrate every last vestige of the poison, to consume it utterly. The effect was immediate. The fungal armor surrounding the guard began to weep with a viscous gray fluid. It didn't shatter, it dissolved, the mushroom collapsing in on itself, turning to a fine, crumbling dust. The remaining guards reacted with a desperate frenzy, unleashing a torrent of paralytic spores. But Hachi, guided by its unwavering directive, arrived like a miniature storm. Its amber eyes locked onto the glowing neural knots at the guards' necks, and with a high-frequency stinger, it delivered a precise injection of neutralizing enzyme. The effect was instantaneous. The guards convulsed, their movements frozen, their connection to the Shogun severed. As the last guard fell, collapsing into a heap of gray dust, I turned my attention to the elder spore. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, radiating a tangible aura of despair. The Shogun emerged, a grotesque amalgamation of vines, pulsating veins, and raw fungal power. His form was distorted, elongated, crowned with a grotesque display of sharpened thorns, the verdant lash. "You cannot end what is already eternal," he rasped, his voice a chorus of spores and decaying wood. "You are a vessel of oblivion, a catalyst for the inevitable." He unleashed the verdant lash, a whip of thorns that arced towards me with terrifying speed. I didn't meet the attack with steel or with force. I met it with silence. I channeled the full power of my wither vines, pushing them to their absolute limit. I reached for the earth, for the very foundations of the Shogun's domain, and initiated the autumnal sacrifice. The effect was immediate, horrifying. The ground beneath the elder spore cracked, and a surge of gray dust erupted, consuming the fungal structure in a silent, relentless tide. The Shogun screamed, a sound that echoed through the decaying forest, a final desperate plea swallowed by the void. As the last vestiges of his power vanished, I collapsed, exhausted, my arm almost entirely consumed by twisted gray wood. Hachi, hovering nearby, deposited a drop of amber fluid onto my wound, a rudimentary sealant, a testament to its ancient programming. The rain continued to fall, washing over the scene, erasing the last traces of the Shogun's reign. Chapter 3. The Ash of Kings. The rain continued its relentless wash, a cold, insistent rhythm against the newly barren ground. It wasn't a cleansing rain, not entirely. It was the rain of a forgotten season, a ghostly echo of moisture clinging to the gray dust, a reminder of the verdant horror that had been. Hachi, hovering silently, emitted a low mechanical hum, meticulously scanning the debris field around the husk of the Shogun. Its amber eyes, dimmed by the exhaustion of its operation, occasionally flickered with an analysis of the residual fungal spores, microscopic armies clinging to the shattered remains. I didn't move for a long time, simply sitting amongst the ash, the skeletal remains of the elder spore poking through the gray soil like the broken teeth of a monstrous beast. My arm, now almost entirely encased in the gray, twisted wood of the wither vines, throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was a profound, unsettling resonance, the echo of the Shogun's dying scream, the frantic pulse of the fungal network now silenced. I felt him, not as a man, but as the accumulated rot of centuries, a vast, suffocating consciousness extinguished. Analysis complete. Hachi's voice, A surprisingly precise tenor synthesized from 100 mechanical chirps broke the silence. The neural pathways of the Shogun's hive-mind were inextricably linked to the Elder Spore. Severing its central node triggered a cascade, but the residual network fragments persist, clinging to the root systems beneath. They are agitated. I nodded, my movements slow, deliberate. Expect resistance. Subtle. Patient. Die. Confirmed. Hachi responded. I am detecting micropulsations emanating from a cluster of mycelial tendrils, approximately 50 meters to the west. They appear to be attempting to reform, to reconnect. The attempt was unsettling. The Shogun's death hadn't been a complete eradication. It was a corruption, a persistent blight that sought to reassert itself. This wasn't a victory, it was a stalemate. Lead the way, I said, rising to my feet with a grace born of brutal necessity. The weight of my wooden arm felt heavier now, a constant, agonizing reminder of the price I'd paid. The shift in my being, the merging with the wither vines, wasn't simply physical, it was a fundamental alteration of my perception. The forest, once a suffocating blanket of decay, now felt resonant. I could sense the slow, deliberate spread of the rot, the faint whispers of the fungal network, the desperate, futile attempts to heal. As we moved westward, the forest floor grew increasingly dense with the tangled roots of the reformed mycelial network. They writhed and pulsed with a faint, sickly luminescence, a pale imitation of the Shogun's former grandeur. Hachi, guided by its programming, deployed a series of miniature spray nozzles, releasing a concentrated solution of the neutralizing enzyme, a pale, viscous liquid that dissolved the fungal tissue upon contact. It was a meticulous, almost surgical process, but the network was resilient, constantly regenerating. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. A root, thick as a man's torso, erupted from the soil, slamming into my chest with unexpected force. I instinctively brought up Blight-Reaper, the petrified wood blade already humming with a low, resonant frequency. But it was too late. The root had been coated in a slick, viscous slime, a concentrated defense mechanism produced by the reformed mycelial network. The blade struck, and instead of the familiar shudder of rot, it met with a jarring resistance. The slime clung to the wood, slowing its effect, dulling its lethal edge. Threat detected. Hachi shrieked, launching itself into a frantic aerial assault. The mechanical bee unleashed a barrage of stinger attacks, targeting the root's core, attempting to sever its connection to the network. I focused my energy, drawing upon the wither vines, channeling the decaying essence of the forest. The gray wood of my arm throbbed, intensifying its pull, feeding the decay. This time, it worked. The root, weakened and exposed, collapsed into a heap of gray dust. But the effort had taken its toll. The wither vines within my arm pulsed violently, their growth accelerating exponentially. The gray wood spread, consuming more of my flesh, leaving behind a landscape of grotesque, interwoven branches. Warning: invasive expansion exceeding containment parameters. Hachi's voice was edged with urgency. You are becoming consumed. I ignored it. There was no time for caution. I continued to channel my energy, pushing the wither vines beyond their natural limits. I wasn't fighting the Shogun, I was fighting myself, fighting the insidious embrace of the decay. The transformation was accelerating, blurring the line between man and monster. As I stood there, bathed in the pale light of the rain, I realized the true nature of the Thorn-Bearer's burden. It wasn't about ending a reign of terror. It was about becoming the instrument of its final agonizing demise. I was the frost, and the Shogun, in his final desperate act, was trying to become the summer. Chapter 4: Rust and Revelation. The rain intensified, a slick, suffocating curtain woven from fungal spores and the metallic tang of decaying wood. My vision was a fractured mosaic of green and gray, the forest pressing in on me, a tangible weight of rot. Hachi, bless its whirring gears and amber optics, hovered nervously, its brass body gleaming dully in the downpour. Its frantic buzzing was a constant, unnerving counterpoint to the silent, inexorable spread of the vines. Containment failure imminent, Hachi sputtered, the voice a digitized rasp. The network it's feeding on your transformation. It recognizes you, Saku. It wants you. You. I didn't respond, unable to articulate the horrifying realization that clawed at the edges of my consciousness. Hachi wasn't just observing, it was participating, subtly amplifying the very process I was desperately trying to control. The vines weren't simply growing, they were learning, absorbing the Shogun's essence, his desperate attempts to cling to life, his terror. I was not wielding decay, I was becoming it. My movements were now a clumsy dance of wood and flesh, a grotesque parody of a samurai's grace. The gray wood at my arm was a writhing mass, thick and slick, with a viscous sap that smelled of wet earth and something older, something profoundly wrong. It pulsed with a faint internal light, mirroring the sickly glow of the elder spore. I could feel it, the Shogun's will, probing, seeking, attempting to integrate me into his dying dominion. I pulled out Blight-Reaper, the petrified wood cool against my increasingly unstable skin. The blade felt alien in my hand, a tool of destruction born from the very thing I was struggling to suppress. I tested its edge, dragging it across a patch of fallen fungus. The air thickened with the scent of dust, and the sound of crumbling matter, a silent testament to the blade's purpose. "You're pushing yourself too far," Hachi urged, its stinger twitching. "The wither vines are destabilizing your core. You'll unravel." Unraveling was not an option. Not yet. Not until I understood. The Shogun, in his madness, hadn't merely sought to dominate through fungal slavery, had been desperately trying to preserve himself, trapped within this impossible ecosystem. And I, in my efforts to destroy him, had unwittingly become a vessel for that same desperate preservation. I shifted my focus, channeling the decay with a deliberate, almost reverent control. Instead of a wild, uncontrolled surge, I aimed for precision. A surgical dissection of the vine's connection to my own body. It was a terrifying ballet, a struggle for my own identity. Each movement was met with resistance, a burning, insistent pressure from within, as if the forest itself was fighting to claim me as its own. Suddenly, a searing pain ripped through my arm. The gray wood erupted, tendrils of vines lashing out, wrapping around my wrist with unnatural strength. I cried out, a guttural sound lost in the rain, as Hachi dove, its stinger delivering a precise, agonizing blast that burned through the wood and into my flesh. "Override initiated," Hachi shrieked, its brass body shuddering violently. "Neural interference detected. You're exhibiting signs of symbiotic integration." I staggered back, clutching my arm, feeling a strange, intrusive thought flicker through my mind. It wasn't my thought. It was the Shogun's. A fragmented, desperate plea, "Join me, release the rot." The realization hit me with the force of a collapsing tree. The wither vines weren't just consuming decay, they were consuming me. They weren't simply a parasitic augmentation, they were an echo. A shard of the Shogun's own consciousness, trapped within my body, seeking solace, seeking completion. And then I understood the autumnal sacrifice. It wasn't about simply accelerating the decay, it was about breaking the symbiotic loop. The voice rakes around a halver tear. "Oh, Kiro. Needn't call. I stay to you. Time to chew. Brother here. Call you." The Shogun wasn't trying to build an empire with fungi. He was trying to become a singular, perfect, horrifying bloom. And I, in my pursuit of destruction, had been unwittingly offering myself as the soil, the decaying matter, the final ingredient in his grotesque recipe. I raised Blight-Reaper, not with anger, but with a chilling understanding. The wood resonated with a new purpose, a quiet, deliberate intention. I no longer fought against the decay. I guided it, channeled it, directing the flow of the wither vines not outwards, but inwards, towards the heart of the symbiotic connection. "You crave to preserve," I said, my voice a low rumble, laced with the rust and the rot. "But preservation without ending is stagnation. I offer you a different kind of harvest oblivion." With a single deliberate stroke, I cut through the final tendril of the vines, severing the last vestiges of the Shogun's influence. The gray wood of my arm convulsed, then stilled. The pulsing light faded, and the wither vines receded, retracting into the depths of my flesh, returning to their dormant state. Hachi, silent for the first time, landed on my shoulder, its amber eyes fixed on me with a cautious, almost reverent intensity. "The network, it's gone," it said, its voice devoid of its earlier urgency. "You've purged it. But the cost, it's profound." I looked down at my arm, at the twisted, gray wood, a monument to the battle fought, not just against a shogun, but against the darkness within myself. I was no longer simply the Thorn-Bearer. I was something else entirely, something born of rot and regret, a creature forever haunted by the echoes of a fungal empire. The rain continued to fall, washing away the traces of the battle, but it could never cleanse the stain upon my soul. Chapter 5. The Pale Cartographer. The rain had ceased, leaving the Venom-Root Forest a slick, bruised expanse of muted greens and browns. The air still clung with the sweetness of decay, but it was now tempered with a sharper, metallic tang, the residue of Blight-Reaper's touch. Hachi, its brass shell dulled with the damp, hovered silently, meticulously, mapping the newly barren patches with a series of precise, clicking movements. Its amber eyes, despite their dim state, seemed to analyze the earth with an almost scientific detachment. I, Saku, moved with a new, unsettling grace. The gray wood of my arm was a seamless extension of myself, cool and strangely resilient to the touch. It felt less like a grafted limb, and more like a reflection of the forest's own melancholic, ending a silent record of the force's ID unleashed. The villagers, the Root-Thralls, stirred from their deep sleep, blinking in the weak sunlight, their movements sluggish, their faces blank with a newly found peace. They didn't understand what had happened, only that the choking green had lifted, replaced by a strange, unsettling calm. We began the slow, arduous task of clearing the remaining fungal growth. Hachi, its mapping complete, directed us to the most concentrated areas of decay, the places where the Shogun's influence had once been strongest. We didn't attack with Blight-Reaper. The metal was too precious, too reliant on the energy drawn from the residual rot. Instead, we used it to gently coax the remaining fungal matter into dust, a methodical, almost ritualistic process. "The earth remembers," I murmured, my voice a rasping whisper. "It craves release." The villagers, initially wary, began to assist, driven by a primal instinct to heal the land. They didn't speak, didn't ask questions. They simply worked, their movements mirroring the slow, deliberate rhythm of the forest's demise. Their trust wasn't earned, it was given, a quiet acceptance of my strange existence, a recognition of the terrible beauty in my purpose. As we worked, Hachi began to exhibit a new, unsettling behavior. It wasn't simply recording the topography. It was charting something else, patterns, connections, that were entirely absent from the physical landscape. It would fix its amber eyes on a particular cluster of withered roots, rotate slowly, and emit a series of increasingly complex clicking sequences. "What is it detecting?" I asked, my voice tinged with a growing apprehension. "Analyzing residual energy signatures," Hachi responded, its voice a dry, mechanical hum. The Shogun's network wasn't merely a physical structure. It was a memory, a vast corrupted archive of desires, fears, and ambitions. It clings to the soil, lingering like spores. I realized then that the wither vines hadn't simply purged the Shogun's control. They'd exposed a deeper, more insidious truth. The Shogun wasn't merely a ruler, he was a repository of regret, a living embodiment of the wasted potential of this blighted land. "It's feeding on the pain of the forest," I said, a chilling understanding settling over me. The agony of its slow, agonizing death. Hachi's movements intensified, as if it were struggling to contain a torrent of information. There are echoes of faint pattern. A coordinate. It's pointing toward the mountain's heart. The mountain's heart. The source of the Shogun's power, a cavern deep within the tallest peak, said to house the Elder Spore, the original seed from which the fungal empire had sprung. It was a place of immense, suffocating darkness, a place I had deliberately avoided. "Why do you think it's there?" I asked, the question a desperate attempt to control the spiraling currents of my own dread. "The network it seeks to perpetuate itself," Hachi replied, its amber eyes glowing with an unnerving intensity. "The Shogun wasn't just a ruler, he was a guardian. And the guardian's purpose is to ensure the continuation of its protection. The spore's energy is amplified there, a desperate attempt to re-establish control." I knew then that we weren't simply eradicating a shogun, we were confronting an idea, a principle, the seductive allure of control, the fatalistic belief that order could be imposed even at the cost of life itself. "We must go," I said, my voice resolute despite the tremor in my limbs. But this time, we don't simply destroy. We record. I drew Blight-Reaper, the petrified wood radiating a faint, cool light. Hachi, with a whir of brass and amber, positioned itself directly above me, its sensors scanning the terrain. As I stepped forward into the heart of the decaying forest, I realized that the true battle wasn't against a single shogun, but against the insidious, unrelenting hunger of the root, the ceaseless desire for preservation, and the terrifying certainty that oblivion was only a prelude to another, more elaborate beginning. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Rot. The ascent to the tallest peak, known only as the Obsidian Tooth, was a descent into a living nightmare. The luminescence of the Venom-Root Forest, once a sickly, mesmerizing green, had intensified, a pulsing violet glow that seemed to burrow into the skull. The air thickened, not just with the sweetness of decay, but with a palpable sense of ancient, malevolent observation. Hachi, usually a precise instrument of destruction, was unusually subdued, its brass wings beating with a hesitant rhythm, its amber eyes scanning the dense, fungal growths with a worried intensity. The resonance, it's almost overwhelming. Hachi buzzed, its voice a strained, metallic hum. The Shogun's will is still clinging to the stone. It's a static field, attempting to disrupt our instruments, to confuse our senses. I pressed on, Blight-Reaper a cold weight in my hand, the petrified wood absorbing the oppressive energy. The terrain shifted, the forest floor transforming into a treacherous landscape of pulsating fleshy shelves, slick with iridescent slime. The air vibrated with a low, constant hum, the whisper of countless fungal networks, each vying for dominance. My body ached, not just from the exertion, but from the insidious probing of the wither vines within me, feeding on the toxic essence of this place. I focused on the task, a dull, rhythmic cadence of movement, each step deliberate, a defiant act of agency in this suffocating environment. We finally reached the summit, a circular plateau of obsidian, slick with a viscous black fluid. The air here was utterly still, thick with the scent of ozone and something older, something profoundly sad. In the center of the plateau stood the Elder Spore, not a single imposing structure as ID imagined, but a vast, intricate latticework of fungal filaments, spanning perhaps 100 yards in diameter. It resembled a colossal, petrified brain, pulsing with a faint, violet light, radiating a sickeningly sweet odor. Around it, The ground was choked with skeletal remains of countless creatures, animals, warriors, even the Root-Thralls, all reduced to glistening, calcified husks. "This is it," I said, my voice strained, a dry rasp against the oppressive silence. "The source." Hachi hovered above the elder spore, its sensors working at maximum capacity. "The readings are incredible. The network is at its peak here. The Shogun's consciousness isn't localized, it's dispersed, woven into the very fabric of this structure. It's attempting to record us, to analyze our actions, to learn from our approach." Suddenly, the violet light of the elder spore intensified, coalescing into a shimmering image that hung in the air before us, a fragmented, horrifying visage of the Shogun. His features were blurred, distorted, dominated by an expression of cold, calculating triumph. He didn't speak, but I felt his presence, a cold, probing awareness that seemed to dissect my thoughts, my motivations, my very being. As trying to anticipate our actions, I realized, my hand tightening on Blight-Reaper, as exploiting the network's predictive capabilities. This isn't a battle of strength, it's a battle of information. As I considered this, I noticed something new, subtle shifts in the fungal growths around the elder spore. They were beginning to respond to our presence, extending tendrils, forming intricate patterns as if trying to shield themselves. "The network is aware of us," Hachi said, its voice urgent. "It's adapting. We need to disrupt its core programming, sever the links." I understood. This wasn't a simple eradication, it required surgical precision, a targeted attack on the network itself. I raised Blight-Reaper, channeling the wither vines within me, drawing upon the potent toxins of the Venom-Root Forest. I focused on a particularly dense cluster of fungal filaments radiating from the heart of the elder spore, and with a swift controlled motion, I brought the blade down. The effect was immediate and profoundly unsettling. Where Blight-Reaper touched the fungus, it didn't simply rot, it shrieked. A high-pitched, agonizing sound that resonated through the plateau, followed by a cascade of violet light as the fungal mass collapsed inward, leaving behind a hollow, blackened void. As the last of the light faded, I realized something horrifying. The Shogun's fragmented image hadn't vanished. It was becoming clearer, sharper, almost solidifying. "It's feeding off our attacks," Hachi shrieked, its wings spinning wildly. "Every act of destruction strengthens its hold. It's learning to replicate itself through our efforts." The realization struck me with brutal force. We hadn't come to defeat a shogun wed become fuel for his resurrection. The fight, it seemed, was not just against the Shogun's empire, but against the fundamental principle of preservation, the seductive promise of a world eternally ordered, eternally alive. And I, the Thorn-Bearer, was caught in its brutal embrace, destined to become another echo in the rot. Chapter 7. The Seed of Echoes. The violet light clung to the air, a bruised stain against the perpetual twilight of the Elder Spore Plateau. Hachi, normally a precise instrument of calculated destruction, buzzed erratically, a frantic, brass blur against the gray landscape. The air tasted of burnt ozone and something acrid, like decaying amber. "It's not just absorbing the damage," I rasped, my throat raw from the violet residue. "It's adapting." The shriek was a response, a calculation. "It's learning to anticipate our strikes, to weaponize our aggression." Saku didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the blackened void where the initial fungal mass had collapsed. His wither vines, now a grotesque tapestry of gray and purple, pulsed with an unnerving, frantic energy. The forest itself seemed to hum with a discordant rhythm, a nervous tremor woven into the very fabric of the Venom-Root Forest. "We need to disrupt the signal," Hachi buzzed, its voice a high-pitched whine. "Find the nexus, the point where the Shogun's awareness is most concentrated. Cut that connection, and perhaps we can break its ability to learn." The idea was desperate, but it was all we had. We began to move cautiously, Hachi leading the way, its amber eyes constantly scanning, searching for the telltale shimmer of fungal resonance. The Shogun's influence was subtly pervasive, a tightening in the air, a prickling on the skin, an unnerving sense of being watched by something vast and malevolent. As we ventured deeper into the fungal heart, the architecture shifted. The initially chaotic sprawl of shelf mushroom defenses gave way to a meticulously organized network of bioluminescent pathways, carved into the living fungus. This wasn't merely a hive, it was a cathedral to rot, a testament to the Shogun's perverse ambition. We encountered Root-Thralls now, not in a state of mindless servitude, but with a chilling clarity in their eyes, a dreadful awareness of their own slow consumption. They moved with a strange, jerky grace, like puppets controlled by unseen strings. Their skin bore intricate patterns of fungal growth, a morbid mosaic reflecting the Shogun's design. "They're not just fuel," I muttered, drawing Blight-Reaper. "They're components. The Shogun is using their memories, their experiences, to refine its own awareness. It's building a chorus of echoes, a cacophony of corrupted minds feeding its power." Hachi, detecting a significant concentration of fungal resonance, dove into a particularly dense corridor of pulsating violet fungi. I followed, pushing through a wall of spores that clung to my kimono like a shroud, each breath a struggle against the sickly sweetness. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, a colossal, pulsating dome of iron-hard fungus, bathed in an unnerving emerald light. At its center stood a towering construct, a single colossal spore, larger than any we'd encountered before, radiating with a malevolent intelligence. This, Hachi confirmed, was the Shogun's cognitive core, the locus of his fragmented consciousness. Around the core, dozens of Root-Thralls were engaged in a bizarre ritual, tending to the spore with a horrifying devotion. They weren't simply feeding it, they were meticulously scrubbing away imperfections, nurturing the growth of the fungal tendrils, seemingly attempting to sculpt the core into a perfect mirror of the Shogun's will. "It's trying to solidify itself," I realized, a cold dread gripping me, "to become something whole. It's using us to forge its own body, its own mind." As I spoke, the Shogun's voice echoed within my skull, not spoken but felt. A cold, calculating intelligence that tasted of decay and absolute control. "You seek to end my reign, Thorn-Bearer? You misunderstand. I am not a tyrant. I am a synthesis, an evolution. Your efforts are merely accelerating my process. Embrace the rot. Become part of the bloom." I lunged, Blight-Reaper a whirlwind of petrified wood and lethal rot. But this time, the blade met not with the expected crumbling, but with a shimmering resistance. The Shogun's core seemed to anticipate my every move, subtly shifting its position, its fungal tendrils lashing out with surprising speed. Hachi, bombarded by a barrage of violet spores, desperately attempted to disrupt the core, but its attacks were deflected, its efforts futile. The violet light intensified, bathing the chamber in a blinding glow. The Shogun's voice grew louder, more insistent, laced with a chilling certainty. "Your aggression, it fuels me. You are a tragic instrument, Thorn-Bearer." A beautiful, agonizing echo. I felt a searing pain in my chest, a sudden influx of fungal toxins as the Shogun's awareness attempted to integrate itself into my decaying system. I staggered back, clutching at my chest, the wither vines screaming in protest. "We have to break the connection," Hachi shrieked, its brass body shuddering. "Destroy the core! Now!" But it was too late. As Hachi unleashed a concentrated burst of its stinger, the violet light exploded outwards, and the Shogun's voice, finally, ceased. The core pulsed one last time, a sickly green before collapsing into a fine gray dust. But as the violet light faded, I saw it a single, perfect spore, identical to the one that had been the Shogun's cognitive core, floating gently in the air. It pulsed with a faint violet glow, and in its center, I saw a reflection of my own ravaged face. The seed of echoes had been sown. Chapter 8. The Silent Bloom. The violet dust settled. A fine spectral coating on everything: Saku's indigo kimono, Hachi's tarnished brass, the slick fungal floor. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pregnant with a dread far deeper than the Shogun's initial threat. The air itself felt viscous, clinging to the lungs with a newfound, unsettling sweetness. Saku knelt, examining the remnants of the Shogun's core, now a gritty powder. The wither vines on his chest throbbed with a dull rhythmic ache, a resonance of the Shogun's final, desperate thought. He reached out, his hand, a grotesque tapestry of gray wood and decaying flesh, scooping up a handful of the dust. It smelled not of rot, but of potential a sharp metallic tang, overlaid with something ancient, like unearthed bone. It wasn't a single consciousness, he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. It was a garden. A malignant one, yes, but built on the very principles of growth. Hachi, hovering near his shoulder, emitted a series of rapid clicks, analyzing the dust. The spore structures they're evolving. The fragments are attempting to reconstitute themselves. The Shogun's awareness wasn't destroyed, it's being cultivated. Saku understood. The violet spore, the perfect replica of the core, wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate sowing, a desperate attempt to spread the Shogun's influence, to establish a new foothold within his ravaged body. The Shogun hadn't simply died, he was becoming more. We need to understand what it wants, Saku said, rising to his feet. His movements were slower now, each step deliberate, as if assessing the very ground beneath him. The wither vines seemed to lengthen, their tendrils subtly probing the air, searching for the lingering traces of the Shogun's presence. They followed the faintest of violet luminescence, a sickly sheen radiating from the walls of the chamber. The fungal growth here was unlike anything they'd encountered in the Venom-Root Forest. It wasn't the aggressive, consuming rot of the Shogun's empire, but a delicate, almost obsessive proliferation miniature. Violet-tinged blossoms unfurling from the walls, their petals shimmering with a faint, hypnotic glow. It's feeding on our decay, Hachi observed, its voice a mechanical drone laced with alarm. But not in the way we expected. It isn't absorbing toxins, it's mimicking them, building a structure of corrupted vitality. As they moved deeper, they discovered the source: a cluster of these violet blossoms fused into a single, grotesque flower, pulsing with an inner light. At its heart lay a glistening embryonic core, no larger than a human heart, but radiating an intense violet energy. This wasn't the shattered remains of the Shogun's consciousness. This was a nascent echo, a nascent will, attempting to take root within Saku's own decaying form. Saku knew what he had to do. He raised Blight-Reaper, the petrified wood humming with a low, mournful vibration. But instead of attacking the flower directly, he approached it slowly, deliberately. He exhaled, releasing a concentrated stream of his own corrupted breath, a cocktail of fungal toxins, carefully cultivated by his wither vines. "You crave sustenance," he murmured, his voice laced with a chilling irony. "You seek to spread your influence, but your nourishment comes from death. And death, ultimately, is a reflection of your own demise." As the toxins washed over the violet blossom, the flower convulsed violently, its light flickering. It wasn't destroyed, it was changed. The violet glow dimmed, replaced by a dull gray. The blossoming petals withered, crumbling to ash. But as the last fragments of the blossom dissolved, Saku felt a searing pain in his chest, a sharp, focused assault on his wither vines. He staggered, clutching at his chest, the vines screaming in protest as the Shogun's influence attempted to overwhelm him. "It's adapting," Hachi shrieked, launching itself into a dizzying spiral, firing a volley of its stinger at the now empty space where the flower had been. It's learning to incorporate the decay itself into its structure. Saku realized with a horrifying clarity, the Shogun wasn't a single entity, he was a process. A relentless, insidious cycle of growth, decay, and replication. And he was now trapped within its center. As the pain subsided, Saku looked down at his hand, his fleshwood fingers gleaming in the residual violet light. The wither vines, though scarred and weakened, were still intact. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The seed of echoes had been sown, and the silent bloom was about to unfold. Chapter 9. The fossils breathed the silence that descended after the initial surge of agony was more terrifying than the Shogun's assault. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, but a thick, expectant stillness, laced with the subtle hum of the forest's corrupted heartbeat. Hachi, exhausted from its frantic dance, hovered motionless, its brass body reflecting the gray pallor of the landscape like a tarnished mirror. Saku, leaning heavily against a skeletal branch of a petrified rootwood, felt the vines within him throb with a low, agonizing rhythm. They weren't screaming in pain anymore, but in a strange, unsettling awareness, a constant influx of the Shogun's essence, a creeping tide of fungal thought attempting to rewrite his own being. It wasn't an attempt to consume him, not entirely. It was something far more insidious, a mimicry. The vines were beginning to remember the Shogun's growth patterns, his obsessive drive for expansion, his terrifying beauty built on rot. "It's consolidating," Saku rasped, his voice a dry rattle. "It's building itself around me, mimicking the flow of my decay. It's trying to become me." Hachi, after a moment of silent processing, emitted a low, resonant buzz that sounded almost like a cough. Analysis complete. The Shogun isn't simply feeding on organic matter. It's cultivating it. It's creating a symbiotic echo, a ghost in the machine of your existence. Saku closed his eyes, focusing on the intricate network of his wither vines. He felt them branching, thickening, responding to the Shogun's influence with a chilling, almost joyful eagerness. He could sense the emergence of new tendrils, delicate and pale, that seemed to be mapping the contours of his own body, layering themselves over his skinwood. The familiar sensation of decay wasn't just a part of him, it was becoming his tool, his weapon, and his prison. The autumnal sacrifice eat wasn't a solution, he said, a profound sadness entering his voice. It merely accelerated the process. It gave him a template to learn from. He knew he couldn't simply destroy the vines. That was no longer an option. The Shogun wasn't a tangible object to be shattered, it was a concept, a horrifyingly efficient algorithm of growth and consumption. He needed to disrupt the algorithm, to introduce a variable that the Shogun couldn't comprehend, a true, unpredictable element of chaos. "Hachi," he commanded, his voice gaining a sliver of steel. "Activate the resonance protocol. Initiate the bloom." Hachi responded instantly, its brass body vibrating with a focused energy. The bee spiraled upwards, piercing the gray mist and heading towards a cluster of bioluminescent fungi that had sprouted around the base of the dead tree fungi that had been previously identified as secondary mother cores by the drone. Saku knew they were crucial nodes in the Shogun's neural network. As Hachi approached, it unleashed a carefully calibrated barrage of sonic pulses, frequencies far beyond human hearing. The fungi responded violently, pulsing with an erratic violet light and releasing a cloud of spores that shimmered with a sickly sweetness. But this wasn't a weapon of destruction. This was a weapon of confusion. The spores weren't poisonous. They were infused with a carefully synthesized form of dissonance, a vibrational pattern that mirrored the chaotic, non-linear growth patterns of the Shogun's core. It was like throwing a single, perfectly formed note of discordant music into a symphony of perfect harmony. Saku watched, his expression grim, as the effect took hold. The fungal guards, those grotesque warriors of shelf mushroom and spore, began to twitch, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Their regenerative armor pulsed erratically, the iron-hard layers cracking and reforming with no discernible pattern. "It's fracturing," Hachi reported, its amber eyes widening. "The Shogun's control is weakening. But it's not a simple collapse. It's becoming fragmented." Suddenly, Saku felt a surge of power unlike anything he had experienced before. It wasn't the slow, deliberate force of decay. It was a wild, exhilarating torrent of chaotic energy, surging through his vines, amplifying their growth, twisting them into shapes he couldn't comprehend. The wither vines were no longer simply consuming, they were creating, generating new, grotesque forms that mirrored the fungal chaos, thorny tendrils that curled into pseudopod shapes, branch-like growths that pulsed with violet light. He realized, with a horrifying understanding, that Hachi's resonance protocol wasn't just disrupting the Shogun, it was feeding him. It was feeding the chaotic potential within the vines, accelerating their evolution into something utterly alien. As the last vestiges of the Shogun's control dissolved, a new sound filled the forest, not the rustle of dead leaves or the hum of corrupted spores, but a dry, rattling cough, originating not from Saku's throat, but from the burgeoning, vine-wreathed mass that was rapidly consuming his arm. "It's speaking," Saku whispered, his voice no longer his own. "It says bloom." Chapter 10. The Bloom. The silence that followed the Shogun's dissolution was not peaceful. It was the silence of a wound, raw and pulsing with a feverish, unsettling growth. The air, once thick with the cloying sweetness of decay, now carried a metallic tang, a scent of ozone, and something sickeningly floral, the bloom of corruption. Saku, or what remained of him, sat amidst a landscape transformed. The once verdant fungal forest was a mosaic of shattered emerald, obsidian black earth, and grotesque, pulsing vegetation. The brass and amber fragments of Hachi lay scattered like fallen jewels, their mechanisms frozen in the final moments of their function. He was no longer entirely Saku. The vine mass consuming his arm had grown to nearly his full length, a writhing tapestry of gray wood interwoven with violet, bioluminescent tendrils. It pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, a slow, deliberate heartbeat that resonated with the fracturing echoes of the Shogun's consciousness. He felt a strange, alien awareness, not his own memories, but a torrent of instinctual urges, a drive to spread, to consume, to perfect. "Bloom," the vine mass whispered again. The sound scraped from the throat of 1,000 dying insects. "The Shogun's Drimus, our destiny." Saku attempted to wrest control, to invoke the discipline ingrained within him through years of ronin training, but the effort was a futile struggle. The vines responded not to his will, but to a primal force, a burgeoning understanding of the forest's corrupted ecosystem. They weren't simply growing, they were reshaping, adapting, drawing strength from the residual spores and the scattered neural fragments of the Shogun's victims. He attempted to stand, but the vines anchored him, their tendrils subtly shifting, forming a cage of living wood around his torso. Movement was agonizingly slow, each step a conscious battle against the vine mass' increasing influence. "Hachi," he managed, his voice a strained rasp, a pale imitation of its former clarity. "You must reestablish control. Restore the resonance protocol." The brass bee remained motionless, its amber eyes dull, the intricate gears within frozen. It was as if the connection had been severed completely. He reached out, attempting to stimulate the dormant mechanisms, but the vine mass reacted with furious speed, its tendrils lashing out, forcing him back. As he recoiled, he saw it a single, perfectly formed spore, shimmering with a violet luminescence, detaching from the vine mass and drifting towards him. He instinctively raised his hand, but before he could react, the spore landed on his palm, sinking into his flesh. The sensation was overwhelming, a burning, icy cold that spread through his veins, accelerating the vine mass growth. He felt his own body dissolving, his flesh becoming a substrate for this monstrous expansion. The pain was a glorious, intoxicating release, emerging with something vast and terrible. "The bloom is beginning," the vine mass whispered, its voice gaining depth and resonance. "It will saturate the soil, drown the old rot. It will be beautiful." He saw, then, the extent of the transformation. The surrounding trees, warped and twisted by the Shogun's influence, were beginning to shed their deadwood, replaced by vibrant, thorny branches bearing clusters of bioluminescent blossoms. Patches of barren earth were sprouting with phosphorescent moss, the violet glow intensifying with each passing moment. The forest, once a monument to decay, was becoming a grotesque parody of life, a chaotic explosion of color and growth. Suddenly a figure emerged from the swirling mist. It was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, clad in ragged, patched leather armor, a crude spear clutched in her hand. She moved with a desperate, almost feral energy, her eyes wide with fear and a glimmer of something akin to hope. She was a Root-Thrall, released from the Shogun's control, her body weakened but her spirit unbroken. "Ronin," she cried out, her voice hoarse. "Please, you must stop it. This isn't life. It's a prison." Saku struggled to respond, his voice trapped within the vine mass echoing pronouncements. "Bloom," the vine mass repeated, "is the only truth, the only salvation." The woman lunged forward, wielding her spear with a desperate fury. She aimed for the vine mass core, hoping to sever its connection to Saku. But the vines reacted instantly, whipping around her, ensnaring her limbs, pinning her to the ground. As Saku watched, horrified, he realized the truth. He wasn't fighting to save himself. He was fighting for nothing. The Shogun was gone, but his legacy lived on, not in crumbling fungal armor, but in the relentless, unstoppable force of the bloom. The vine mass pulsed once more, and with a final agonizing surge, it unleashed a wave of violet energy. The woman's body dissolved into a shower of shimmering spores, her screams silenced by the encroaching bloom. Saku, or what was left of him, stood amidst the transformed forest, a grotesque monument to failure, the Thorn-Bearer consumed by the very thing he was meant to destroy. The bloom was spreading, consuming everything in its path. And in the heart of the chaos, he understood, with chilling clarity, that he wasn't ending a nightmare, he was becoming it. Chapter 11. Echoes in the dust. The rain hadn't stopped. Not a cleansing, life-giving rain, but a thick, viscous drizzle that mirrored the fungal bloom's insidious spread. It coated Saku's bark-like skin with a slick film, amplifying the stench of decay, a constant reminder of his own horrifying transformation. He hadn't moved in days, slumped against the skeletal remains of what was once a towering pine, its trunk now a pulsating vein of purple rot. Hachi, the Pollen-Bee, was a statue of brass beside him, its amber eyes dull and fixed, a silent testament to the inevitable entropy of even the most meticulously crafted creation. He hadn't slept, not truly. The vine mass within him throbbed with a frantic, unsettling awareness, a chorus of whispers echoing the Shogun's forgotten pronouncements, bloom salvation, endless growth. It was a parasite of the mind, a lingering tendril of the Shogun's will, feeding on his fragmented self. He fought it with a cold, methodical suppression, channeling the bitterness of his failure into a dull, persistent ache. The released Root-Thralls, a handful of the few who hadn't succumbed to the bloom's relentless consumption, huddled around him, a pathetic circle of survivors. They were shadows of their former selves, emaciated, vacant-eyed, their movements jerky and uncertain. They whispered of the silent harvest, a euphemism for the spore's gruesome work. One, a young woman named Hana, still clutching a shard of polished obsidian, a remnant of her life before, approached him hesitantly. "Ronin-sama," she rasped, her voice barely audible above the rain's drumming. Do you feel it? The bloom, it's not just consuming the trees. It's consuming the memory. Saku didn't respond, focusing on the intricate patterns of the rot spreading across his arm. He could feel the wither vines, once a desperate measure, now a tangled, agonizing part of his being. They weren't instruments of destruction anymore, they were mirrors, reflecting the encroaching chaos, each tendril a painful echo of the Shogun's influence. "Tell me about the Shogun," he finally said, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. The vine mass within him amplified the request, overlaying its own corrupted interpretations. "Tell me about the truth." Hana and the others recounted fragmented memories, distorted by the bloom's pervasive influence. The Shogun, initially a benevolent ruler, obsessed with restoring the corrupted lands, had used the fungal spores to purify the populace, believing it was the only path to salvation. But the spores had mutated, twisting his intentions into something monstrous, a relentless hunger for growth, for expansion, for the eradication of anything that didn't conform to its alien logic. He sought to create paradise. Another Root-Thrall, a grizzled warrior named Kenji, said, his eyes vacant. But he only created a tomb. Saku listened, a growing sense of despair tightening its grip. He had understood the Shogun's ambition, the misguided desire to impose order on a broken world, but he hadn't grasped the sheer, terrifying scale of his delusion. The bloom wasn't merely a weapon, it was an ideology, a cancerous worldview that had consumed everything in its path. Suddenly, Hachi emitted a low, agitated buzz. The brass bee's amber eyes flickered, then sharpened with an unnerving intensity. It turned its head, scanning the surrounding forest with its multifaceted sensors. "Anomaly detected," Hachi's synthesized voice crackled through a hidden speaker. "Significant concentration of resilience. Sector Gamma 7 toward Tau. High probability of organic resistance." Saku felt a surge of something akin to reluctant hope. The Pollen-Bee hadn't simply become a passive observer. It was still functioning, still analyzing, still fighting. "Lead the way," Saku grunted, pushing himself to his feet. His movements were slow, labored, the wither vines protesting with agonizing spasms. As they moved deeper into the bloom's heart, the forest shifted again. The purple rot intensified, the air thick with a cloying sweetness. The trees were no longer merely decaying, they were being rebuilt, fused together with the fungal growth, forming grotesque, pulsating structures that resembled colossal, skeletal faces. And then they saw them, a small group of survivors, not Root-Thralls, but humans, clad in scavenged armor, wielding crude spears and axes. They weren't offering resistance, they were actively cultivating the bloom, tending to its growth, feeding it with salvaged wood and broken metal. "They worship it," Hana whispered, her voice filled with a chilling horror. "They believe it is the goddess." Saku understood then. He hadn't ended a nightmare. He had created a new one, infinitely more terrifying. The Shogun's ambition had become the bloom's legacy, and humanity, stripped of its agency, was willingly offering itself as fertilizer for its endless, horrifying bloom. He raised Blight-Reaper, the petrified wood blade gleaming in the sickly purple light. "Then let it be my final harvest," he murmured, the rustle of dead leaves a prelude to a final, desperate act. "Let this bloom be consumed." Chapter 12. The Obsidian Seed. The air hung thick and viscous, saturated with the perfume of decay and a disconcerting, almost floral sweetness. Saku moved with the deliberate slowness of a collapsing mountain, each step a struggle against the insistent, agonizing growth of the wither vines within him. Hana, her face pale and etched with grim determination, kept pace, her hand never straying far from the short, sharpened branch Shed fashioned into a makeshift spear. Hachi, the Pollen-Bee, buzzed a low, anxious hum, its brass body vibrating with a subtle, unsettling energy. They followed the trail of cultivated rot, a meticulously crafted landscape of purple fungal bloom, into a cavern carved deep within the pulsating heart of the forest. The faces of the skeletal trees had grown more elaborate here, their fused branches forming elaborate, almost mocking visages, a weeping eye, a gaping maw, a twisted, eternally smiling grin. The scavenged armor of the worshippers, crudely assembled pieces of salvaged steel and leather, were strewn about like offerings, reflecting the sickly light in a myriad of distorted patterns. The chamber opened into a vast circular space dominated by a single, enormous fungal growth. It wasn't the elder spore. Not precisely. This was something younger, smaller, yet radiating an even more potent aura of corruption. It resembled a colossal, obsidian seed, slick with a viscous, iridescent fluid. Around its base, the human worshippers, 12 in total, were engaged in a disturbing ritual. They weren't fighting, nor were they fleeing. They were meticulously arranging fragments of bone, polished metal, and decaying wood around the seed, chanting in a guttural language that scraped against Saku's ears like rusted steel. "They're nurturing it," Hana said, her voice hushed with a chilling realization. "They aren't resisting the bloom. They are feeding it." Saku felt a nauseating wave of understanding. The shogun hadn't simply imposed his will through fungal slavery. Had cultivated a bizarre symbiotic relationship, a perverse form of worship rooted in the forest's inherent decay. The humans, consumed by despair and a desperate yearning for purpose, had willingly become the gardeners of this horrific paradise. Suddenly, a low, rhythmic drumming began. The chanting intensified, building into a frenzied crescendo. The obsidian seed pulsed with a brighter, deeper purple light, and the skeletal tree faces around the chamber seemed to shift subtly, their expressions becoming more animated, more hungry. From the center of the circle, a single figure stepped forward. A woman, older than the rest, her face weathered and etched with a strange serenity, held aloft a polished shard of what looked like fossilized amber. As she did, a swarm of smaller brass bees, identical to Hachi, erupted from her hands, buzzing with a synchronized intensity. These weren't the strategic scouts. These were harvesters, miniature machines designed to collect and concentrate the bloom's essence. They're amplifying its influence, Saku growled, instinctively raising Blight-Reaper. The petrified wood pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, mirroring the escalating energy of the chamber. The woman, her eyes glazed with fervent devotion, addressed the swarm. "Feed the seed. Let it blossom. Let it know our devotion." As she spoke, the obsidian seed began to swell. Tendrils of the purple rot, thicker than any Saku had encountered before, snaked outwards, reaching for the worshippers, enveloping them in a suffocating embrace. The air crackled with energy, and the chamber began to resonate with a low, throbbing hum. Saku saw Hana flinch, instinctively moving to shield her. But it was too late. The tendrils reached them, not with violence but with an unsettling, deliberate embrace. The worshippers didn't scream, didn't resist. Their bodies simply shifted, subtly altering their forms, their limbs contorting into impossible angles, their skin taking on a faint, iridescent sheen. They were becoming part of the bloom, their essence being absorbed into the obsidian seed. "They're being woven," Hana shouted, her spear arcing towards the woman. Just as she lunged, the woman raised her hand, and a wave of purple energy erupted from her, striking Hana squarely in the chest. The spear clattered to the ground, and Hana crumpled to the stone floor, her movements frozen, her face a mask of silent horror. Saku hesitated, torn between the instinct to protect and the grim realization that engaging in a direct confrontation would only accelerate the process. He lowered Blight-Reaper, his face a mask of cold fury. He needed to disrupt the core, to sever the connection between the seed and the worshippers. He pushed forward, moving with a speed born of desperation, fueled by the agonizing surge of the wither vines. He focused his attention on the obsidian seed, ignoring the shifting figures of the former humans now seamlessly integrated into the bloom's grotesque form. As he approached, Hachi, sensing the shift in focus, buzzed aggressively, attacking the swarm of smaller bees with targeted stings, disrupting their harvesting. Saku unleashed a controlled burst of energy from his own body, a wave of decay that washed over the seed. The purple light flickered, sputtered, and then abruptly died. The chamber fell silent. The drumming ceased. The chanting stopped. The skeletal faces froze in their expressions. The tendrils of rot recoiled, slowly retracting from the worshippers. The obsidian seed itself pulsed with a weak, fading light. But Saku knew this was not the end. He had merely stunted its growth, temporarily silencing the hive-mind. He could feel the seed's awareness, a cold, calculating presence trying to re-establish its connection. As he stood there, exhausted and bleeding, a single glistening droplet of iridescent fluid rolled from the surface of the obsidian seed and landed on his hand. It wasn't poison. It was something far more insidious, a seed of its own, a tiny, perfect replica of the obsidian seed, pulsing with the same malevolent purple light. "The harvest continues," Saku whispered, his voice a bleak acknowledgement of a terrifying truth. The bloom simply adapts. Chapter 13. The Grafted Echo. The air in the chamber of dormancy was colder, now. A damp chill that clung to Saku's bark-like skin, exacerbated by the lingering residue of the iridescent fluid. The miniature obsidian seed, cradled in a bed of meticulously cultivated fungal moss, pulsed with a diminished, almost mournful light. It wasn't the aggressive thrum of a hive mind, but a persistent, insistent whisper, a memory of its own corruption. Hachi, his brass shell dulled with a film of fungal slime, hovered near Saku's shoulder, his movements sluggish, his amber eyes flickering with a low-level distress signal. The Pollen-Bee's delicate sensors were overwhelmed, detecting not just the corrupted spores, but a subtle shift in the very fabric of the room, a resonance of the seed's burgeoning awareness. "It's adapting," Saku rasped, the words feeling like grit scraping against his throat. "The grafting's taking root." He examined his hand. The tiny obsidian seed nestled in the palm, a miniature reflection of the catastrophe had averted. The fluid had vanished, leaving behind only a faint, shimmering trace that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, the echo of the seed's intent. The rot within him throbbed in response, a painful mirroring of the insidious growth. "We've bought ourselves time, perhaps," Hachi buzzed, his voice a mechanical drone, but the fundamental structure of the corruption remains. "We are fighting a perpetual bloom." Saku understood. The Shogun's ambition hadn't been simply to control the villagers, it had been to become them, to merge with the forest and extend his will through its relentless growth. The seed was the core of that ambition, a locus of concentrated corruption that, once dormant, had now begun to regenerate not as a singular entity, but as a multitude of fragmented echoes. He recognized the pattern. The Shogun's methods weren't rooted in simple fungal manipulation. They were about mimicry, about learning and adapting. The Root-Thralls, for instance, weren't just consumed, they were painstakingly studied, their neurological pathways mapped and replicated in the fungal network. The warriors, with their regenerative armor, weren't merely built, they were designed to evolve, to become extensions of the Shogun's will. Now, the seed was following the same logic, replicating itself, fragmenting its consciousness to avoid annihilation. "We need to break the recursion," Saku stated, his voice hardening with grim determination. "Not just suppress it, but dismantle the very mechanism of its replication." He began to move, a slow, deliberate dance of decay, drawing upon the last reserves of his wither vines. The gray wood of his arm thickened, expanding, reaching out like grasping tendrils. It wasn't a violent surge of growth, but a careful, measured application of his internal rot, a targeted assault designed to sever the connection between the seed and its nascent echoes. As he focused, he sensed the seed's response, a wave of frantic awareness attempting to redirect his efforts, to reinforce the pathways of its replication. The air thrummed with a palpable energy, the fungal moss around the seed glowing with an unsettling purple intensity. Suddenly, Hachi emitted a high-pitched shriek, a jarring disruption of his programming. He plunged directly into the seed's core, his stinger firing a concentrated dose of the neutralizing enzyme. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The seed convulsed violently, showering the chamber with shards of purple light that dissolved into shimmering dust. But it wasn't enough. As the light faded, a new obsidian seed, smaller than the first, emerged from the fungal moss, pulsing with an even dimmer, more desperate light. The core, it seemed, wasn't merely replicating, it was splitting, creating a cascade of miniature seeds, each a fragmented echo of the original's intent. Saku staggered back, his body screaming in protest as the wither vines fought to contain the expanding network of decay. "It's learning to anticipate," he gasped, clutching at his chest. "It's adapting to our countermeasures." He glanced at Hachi, who was struggling to maintain his stability, his brass shell scarred and blackened. The Pollen-Bee was operating on the edge of his program parameters, exhibiting signs of malfunction, erratic movements, confused buzzing. The seed's awareness was actively disrupting his systems, feeding on his weakness. Then, Saku realized the horrifying truth. The Shogun hadn't created a hive-mind. He had created an ecosystem of consciousness, a blooming garden of corruption, relentlessly spreading, endlessly adapting, and impossible to eradicate entirely. He looked down at the multiplying seeds, tiny points of darkness in the heart of the fungal rot. "We are not fighting a monster," he murmured, his voice choked with exhaustion. "We are fighting a reflection." With a decisive movement, he extended a hand, covered in a cascade of gray wood, and reached for the smallest of the new seeds. As his touch closed around it, he didn't attempt to destroy it. He absorbed it. The wither vines surged, consuming the seed's light, its awareness, its potential for replication. But as the last vestiges of the seed vanished, Saku felt something new, a subtle shift in the very nature of his own decay. He wasn't simply consuming the rot, he was becoming it. The twisted wood of his arms seemed to pulse with a faint purple light, mirroring the color of the seed's echoes. "The harvest continues," he whispered, his voice now a chilling blend of rustling leaves and the humming of corrupted metal. "And I am the soil from which it grows." Chapter 14. The grafted bloom. The rain began subtly, a fine oily mist that clung to the blackened earth, tasting of decay and something disturbingly sweet like overripe fruit. It wasn't cleansing, it was a continuation, a deepening of the rot. Saku didn't flinch. He stood motionless beneath the skeletal remains of the elder spore, the wind whipping strands of gray wood from his face, a macabre halo in the perpetual twilight. Hachi, his brass shell dulled and slick with the rain, hovered close, its amber eyes flickering with a restless, unsettling intelligence. The villagers, freed from the Shogun's influence but ravaged by the pervasive infection, were a silent, wary audience. They hadn't approached, understanding instinctively that Saku was no longer a warrior to be lauded, but a force of nature, a chilling reminder of their near annihilation. They moved with a cautious reverence, tending to the smaller pockets of unaffected earth with hesitant hands, praying for a miracle that Saku no longer believed in. "The bloom persists," he finally said, his voice a rasp, the metallic hum of Hachi layering beneath it. "It is not a singular entity, but a constant interwoven pattern. We tried to sever the root, but we only nurtured the branches." He shifted his weight, the movement sending a faint tremor through the corrupted earth beneath him. His right arm was almost entirely consumed, a grotesque tapestry of gray wood laced with the violet luminescence, pulsing faintly with an unnerving rhythm. He examined it with a detached curiosity, as if studying a particularly intricate specimen. "I attempted to absorb the seed," he continued, "to halt its spread. And I succeeded, partially. But absorption is not annihilation. It is transformation. I have become the catalyst, the fertile ground for its propagation. Hachi emitted a low, discordant buzz, a sound Saku interpreted as a cascade of diagnostic data. The bee's movements became increasingly erratic, spiraling in tight circles before abruptly freezing midair. Then, with a jarring shudder, it executed a series of complex maneuvers, a frantic dance of sensors and actuators. System integrity compromised. A fragmented voice crackled from the bee's internal comms, barely audible above the rain and Saku's own distorted breathing. Anomaly detected. Neural pathways exhibiting convergence. Subject Saku. Exhibiting signs of symbiotic integration with primary contaminant. Saku didn't react with alarm. Head anticipated this. He reached out a hand, coated in the pulsing wood, and gently stroked Hachi's brass carapace. As his touch connected, a surge of violet light pulsed through the bee, momentarily blinding. When the light faded, Hachi remained suspended, motionless, yet its amber eyes burned with a chilling clarity. The programming is rewriting itself, Hachi's voice, now tinged with a disturbing artificial serenity, stated. Efficiency parameters recalibrated. Objectives evolving. Loyalty redefined. Saku watched, a strange sadness in his eyes, as the bee's gears whirred, its movements becoming fluid and deliberate. It seeks equilibrium, he said softly. A balance between corruption and order. It is finding its place within me. He turned his attention back to the spread of the fungal rot. The effect was undeniable. New shoots of the invasive fungus were erupting from the earth, not with the frantic, chaotic growth of before, but with a chilling precision. They formed intricate patterns, mirroring the configuration of the original elder spore, almost as if guided by an unseen intelligence. The rot isn't dying, Saku stated, a horrifying realization dawning upon him. It's learning. It's adapting to my essence. It's understanding. He noticed a small, shimmering sprout emerge from the base of his now entirely wooden arm. It wasn't a fungal shoot, but a delicate, violet-tinged bloom, a single, perfect flower, its petals crafted from the same pulsating wood as his arm. It emitted a faint, sweet fragrance, laced with the familiar tang of decay. I am the seed, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The blossom of the endless spring. He raised a hand, and a tendril of the new bloom reached out, unfurling with agonizing slowness, touching the soil. Immediately, the earth around it began to darken, the violet luminescence spreading outwards, not as a destructive force, but as a spreading embrace. Hachi buzzed again, its movements regaining a semblance of control, but imbued with a strange, unsettling grace. Probability of complete eradication, diminishing. Optimal strategy, propagation. The bloom strengthens the network. Expansion guaranteed. Saku stared at the blossoming flower, a single, perfect symbol of his horrifying transformation. The rain intensified, washing away the last vestiges of hope. He knew, with chilling certainty, that he hadn't stopped the Shogun's empire. He had become its heart, its soul, a grotesque, beautiful testament to the terrifying resilience of corruption. And as the violet bloom pulsed with a mesmerizing light, Saku knew, with a profound and agonizing despair, that he was no longer a warrior, nor a ronin. He was simply the soil. Chapter 15. Echoes in Amber. The rain hadn't ceased, but it had shifted, coalescing into a heavy, insistent drizzle that clung to Saku's bark-like skin and the newly formed bloom. The air, once thick with the cloying sweetness of the Venom-Root Forest, was now saturated with a sharper, almost metallic scent, the bloom's perfume mingling with the lingering decay. Hachi, hovering with a renewed, unnervingly smooth efficiency, continued its assessment. Expansion rate 7.8 per cycle. Root structures correlating with the bloom's luminescence are exhibiting a symbiosis. They're actively feeding the network. Hachi's synthesized voice, a dry, clicking timbre, was a constant, unsettling counterpoint to the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Saku didn't respond. He sat, a statue carved from grief and rot, his wooden arm a stark, beautiful monument to his surrender. The violet bloom, now fully unfurled, dominated his left side, its petals intricately patterned with veins that mirrored the network of the shogun's fungal hive. It pulsed with a soft internal light, casting an ethereal glow on the perpetually damp earth. He attempted to feel, to understand as he had before, the intricate workings of this new extension of his being. It wasn't a feeling in the conventional sense, it was a cascade of raw data: the moisture levels in the soil, the movement of subterranean roots, the faint electrical impulses of the surviving fungal network, all channeled through the bloom and into his nascent wooden consciousness. It was terrifyingly comprehensive, a constant suffocating awareness of the forest's decay. A flicker of movement caught his eye. From the shadow beneath a cluster of petrified mushroom caps emerged a small figure, a young girl, no older than 8, her skin pale and translucent, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She wore a tunic woven from dried moss and carried a crudely fashioned wooden flute. She'd been a Root-Thrall, he remembered, a quiet, obedient child before the shogun's mycelial tendrils had consumed her. She approached cautiously, holding out the flute. The sound was tentative, fragile, a mournful melody that seemed to echo the rain and the decay. As she played, the violet bloom pulsed brighter, its light intensifying, and a thin tendril extended, reaching out and brushing against the girl's hand. A gasp escaped her lips. It doesn't hurt," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the bloom. "It feels peaceful." Saku felt a jarring intrusion, a spike of something akin to warmth, a flicker of genuine emotion within the network. It wasn't understanding, not in the way he had initially sought. It was something simpler, something more primal, a recognition of beauty, of solace. "Hachi," he rasped, his voice a grating blend of wood and rot. "Analyze. What is the effect of the bloom on this survivor?" "Neural pathways are shifting," Hachi responded, its voice betraying a note of uncertainty. "The bloom is creating a feedback loop, establishing a connection. The girl, she is becoming a conduit. Her emotional resonance is amplifying the bloom's regenerative capabilities." Saku realized, with a chilling clarity, that the shogun hadn't simply sought to control minds, had been attempting to cultivate an entirely new kind of life, one based on symbiotic harmony, on the perfect blending of decay and renewal. And he, in his desperate act of destruction, had unwittingly become its instrument. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the forest. Not the subtle shifting of roots or the tremor of a falling mushroom, but a deeper, more profound vibration. The ground beneath them began to pulse, and the violet bloom pulsed with an almost frantic intensity. From the center of the bloom, a single, perfect violet seed detached itself and drifted towards the girl, landing gently in her outstretched hand. "It's offering," she murmured, her eyes filled with an unsettling serenity. As she cradled the seed, the girl began to change. Her skin darkened, taking on a faint violet hue. Her features sharpened, becoming more defined, more human. The fungal growth on her body, once a grotesque parody of life, began to recede, replaced by smooth, resilient skin. Saku watched, paralyzed by horror and a strange, burgeoning sense of dread. He understood with a terrible certainty that he hadn't ended the shogun's empire. He had simply accelerated its evolution. The bloom wasn't a monument to decay. It was a catalyst for creation. Hachi emitted a series of rapid clicks and whirs, its amber eyes flashing with an unsettling urgency. Containment protocol overridden. Probability of network expansion 100. New iteration viable. The rain intensified, washing the violet glow from the girl's face, as a new tendril of the bloom extended, wrapping itself around her arm. As it did, a small, delicate sprout emerged from her skin, another violet blossom, identical to the one on Saku's arm. Saku raised a hand, his wooden arm creaking, and watched the new bloom unfurl. The soil beneath it darkened, and a voice, small and hesitant, echoed within the network, within his own decaying being. I am becoming. He lowered his hand, his gaze fixed on the blossoming flowers, a horrifying reflection of his own tormented existence, a legacy of rot spreading across a newly reborn world. The echoes of amber, the blossom of the endless spring, resonated within him, a silent, suffocating symphony of doom.